Got this dark filter I'm going to throw on for a minute. It's a pair of sunglasses that I cut up. Yeah, I'm going to go with that for today. No trackers yet today, not that I've seen anyways, but they could be around somewhere. I'm just not spotting them today. I'm going to run some videos through while I got this thing out here too, I guess.
When you consume sugar, you are poisoning your mitochondria. Sugar and cyanide do the same thing. This is the toxin.
What are the key negatives when we consume the levels of sugar that many of us are currently consuming?
Well, first of all, let's make it very clear that sugar is not the only problem in our diet. It's the big one. It's the 2,000-pound gorilla in our diet, but there's other stuff too. But sugar is a particularly egregious molecule. Once upon a time, trans fats were the worst thing we consumed. Trans fats are the devil incarnate. Trans fats, the bacteria can't chew it up, which is why they put the trans fats in, all right, so that, it would last forever, the 10-year-old Twinkie. Well, the fact is, our mitochondria, our little energy-burning factories inside all our cells, are really refurbished bacteria. We can't chew it up either. So the exact same reason for why they put the trans fats in the food is exactly why you shouldn't eat the food. Now, we know that, and they've come out of our diet. So now, sugar is public enemy number one. So what does sugar do? And the answer is a whole bunch of bad things. The food industry says sugar is energy. Well, they're correct if you're a bomb calorimeter. If you just blow it up, if you explode it, yeah, you get 4 calories per gram. But we are not bomb calorimeters. Turns out that sugar actually poisons the mitochondria. Okay? It poisons it at 3 separate enzymes that are necessary for mitochondria to do their job. The first one, AMP kinase, which is the fuel gauge on the liver cell. The second one, ACAD-L, acyl-CoA dehydrogenase long chain, which is necessary to get fatty acids into the mitochondria to be able to oxidize them to create energy. And the third one is CPT1, carnitine palmitol transferase 1, which is the enzyme that regenerates carnitine, which is the shuttle mechanism that brings the fatty acids into the mitochondria in the first place. In other words, when you consume sugar, you are poisoning your mitochondria. You are generating less of the chemical energy that our cells get powered by, called ATP. So if you're making less ATP, is that energy? It's the opposite of energy. So when you consume sugar, you are actually inhibiting your body's energy production. Can you think of a chemical that inhibits your mitochondria and reduces ATP production? Cyanide. Cyanide does that. Okay? Sugar and cyanide do the same thing. Now, obviously, not as severely. Okay? You know, cyanide parts per million keel over and die on the spot. With sugar, you know, it's in the parts per thousand, and you don't keel over on the spot, but you feel lousy, and over time, it's going to take its toll. But ultimately, if you're inhibiting your mitochondria, you are poisoning your body. And we now have the data to show how that occurs. So here's my question to you and your audience. Sugar is in virtually all ultra-processed foods. And ultra-processed foods are now 56% of the UK diet. And the amount of sugar that Brits eat, 62% of it is found in the ultra-processed food category. So my question to you and your audience is ultra-processed food food?
My view is that it's not really. I would say no, but I know to many people that is super controversial, which we're definitely going to talk about. But yeah, on a straight answer, I would say no. Depends on your definition, I guess, because it's energy, it's got some calories in it, which we consume in our mouth that enable us on one level to sort of, I guess you're saying it's actually reducing the energy production, the sugar within it anyway, but yeah, on one level it sustains people and they can actually get on with their days, at least in the short term anyway.
Well, you have to know what the definition of food is. So, if I had my Webster's dictionary right here, right now, you guys, you know, in the UK probably don't use Webster's, you probably have something else, but if I pulled it off the shelf, it would say that the definition of food is the following, and I have no problem with this definition. Substrate that contributes to either the growth or burning of an organism. That's the definition. I have no problem with that definition. It's a fine definition. All right? Substrate that contributes to either the growth or burning of an organism. So, we've just talked about burning. Sugar does not contribute to the burning of an organism. It actually inhibits the burning of an organism. And Dr. Kevin Hall at the NIH did a study where he showed that when you give people ultra-processed food, they burn less and gain more weight when everything else is controlled for compared to the same diet in real food. Did this in 2019. So, ultra-processed food does not contribute to burning. So now let's go to growth. Does ultra-processed food contribute to growth? My colleague, Dr. Efrat Monsenigo-Ornan, who is the chairman of the Department of Nutrition at Hebrew University, Jerusalem, just published 3 papers in Bone Research showing that ultra-processed food actually inhibits skeletal growth, inhibits the ability of bones to increase in length and in width. And in addition, we know from the Nutrinet Santé study and many other studies that, in fact, what sugar does is it feeds cancer cells, it hijacks growth. So, sugar doesn't contribute to burning, inhibits it. Doesn't contribute to growth, inhibits it, or hijacks it. So, I pose the question to you again, Ranga. Is ultra-processed food food?
I'll go with my original answer, which is no.
That is right. It is no. Ding, ding. That's right. But the point is that the food industry, you know, refuses to go there. The populace refuses to go there. The governments refuse to go there. And You and I are both interested in mitigating chronic disease.
Yeah.
And you are right. If you get people on a real food diet, you can mitigate virtually any and all of their chronic diseases. I completely agree. You gave a TEDx talk basically saying you can basically take away somebody's chronic disease. I used to do that in my clinic, when I was practicing routinely,
Yeah.
but only if they changed the food. And if they didn't change the food, no amount of medicine I threw at them could make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, what strikes me as a really key message is that the majority of what we're buying to feed ourselves and our families is ultra processed food, whether it's here in the UK or with you in America, and that is contributing to this tsunami of chronic ill health that we're seeing. It's pretty, it's pretty alarming. But what I think is so key, Rob, for me is that it's so normalized now. Like, it's the norm everywhere, schools, hospitals. In fact, if you want to go down the real food route, you almost feel like a bit of a, if you try and do it with your kids, you actually become a social outcast in some ways. It's, and I think this is the problem. It's the norm. We've moved so far away from what we used to do. In fact, maybe this is a good time for you to explain what you used to do when you were 8 years old, because I believe you had a granddad who lived in Brooklyn, and every Saturday you would do something which I think beautifully illustrates this point.
That's right. So bottom line is I completely agree with you. What we've done is we've normalized it. Once upon a time it was actually not normal to eat ultra-processed food, and today it is normal. And I remember when that happened because it happened to me. It happened to me in two ways. So on Saturday afternoons, my family would go visit my grandparents, who lived about, 8 miles away in Brooklyn. And my grandfather would walk me down to the corner grocery store to buy a comic book and a 6.5-ounce bottle of Coca-Cola. And I remember, pretty much every Saturday afternoon. And that was the big treat, the comic book and the Coca-Cola. That was on Ocean Avenue and Avenue N in Brooklyn. The fact is that was once a week, and it was 6.5 ounces, right? Today, children are consuming about, I think, 35 ounces a day, median. So they are getting about 6 times the amount of sugar that I did from that one Coke, and they're doing it every day instead of once a week.
Can we just pause on that for a second? You're saying you had 6 ounces once a week, and we're assuming back then that the rest of your diet throughout the week was low in sugar, low in processed foods, sort of a real food diet?
Well, my mother worked 3 jobs, and so I ate a lot of Swanson TV dinners when they first came out. And I remember when they came out around 1964. The fried chicken, the Salisbury steak. I hated that Salisbury steak. And she trained me on how to turn the oven on and how to heat them up, because often she wasn't home at night. So, to some extent I was a latchkey kid because my mother worked so hard. My father was in Manhattan all day. And so, I basically had to sort of take care of myself. And sometimes I had to eat dinner, out of the freezer. And so I remember, those Swanson TV dinners, and, they were a problem, and they're still a problem. So you put the two together, and that was the beginning of, shall we say, onslaught of processed food in the United States, about the mid-60s. Then things picked up even more in 1975, when we started substituting high fructose corn syrup for sucrose because it was half as expensive and it was homegrown. And then finally, the pièce de résistance came in 1977 when the McGovern Commission released its report saying that we all needed to eat less fat to try to prevent cardiovascular disease. Well, when you take the fat out of food, it tastes like cardboard. And so what did the food industry do? It basically replaced the fat with sugar. That's why we ended up with Entenmann's fat-free cakes and, and the like. And that was when the pasta craze, first hit was, refined carbohydrate because it was, quote, low in fat, etc. And, now we're off to the races. And it's just exploded ever since.
Is it the sugar that's inherently bad in and of itself, or is it the
Yes.
excess amounts? I mean, or is it both, right? Because I think a lot of people might say, well, look, you know what, this never used to be a problem, right? And we would have the odd sweet treat now and again. But so, and actually there's quite a few prominent scientists, as you're well aware, Rob, who say actually sugar's not a problem. Sugar's actually completely
Yeah,
fine.
we're working on it. We're working on it. I have a bone to pick with some of those scientists, and we can argue that and talk about that if you like, as to exactly why they say what they say. So here's what I can tell you. All right. There are social drinkers, and there are alcoholics. Now, social drinkers can pick up a beer and put it down, and they don't need one every day. Alcoholics pick up a whiskey and can't put it down, and they need it 3 times a day. Right?
Yeah.
Did the one beer that the social drinker drink hurt them?
Unlikely.
Unlikely. Unlikely. And the reason it's unlikely is because there is what is known as a first pass effect. You drink the alcohol in the beer. First of all, it's very low percentage, right? It's only 3.6% in a beer, all right? And that is about 60 calories worth or so of alcohol. And what happens is that the first pass effect, the stomach and intestine metabolize that alcohol before any of it ever gets to the liver. And so the amount that actually hits the liver that could do damage is exceedingly small. And as long as you're not following up with a second beer and a third beer and a fourth beer and a fifth beer, like can happen at the Newcastle pub, you don't usually have a big problem, right? But if you keep doing that, then that is a problem. So it's a dose-dependent phenomenon, and your intestine is there to try to protect your liver from getting the onslaught before it will do damage. Same with sugar. No difference. So your intestine can take a small amount of sugar that you consume and can actually turn it into fat in the intestine. Intestinal de novo lipogenesis, the process of converting sugar to fat into VLDL in the intestine so that it will not go straight to your liver, right? And about 10% of an initial sugar bolus will undergo intestinal DNL and therefore be diverted away from the liver and into the bloodstream as VLDL. Now, that VLDL is not great for you because it could ultimately cause heart disease, but it's protecting the liver. But if you consume past your intestine's capacity to do that, now the rest of it's going to end up in your liver. And the problem with sugar in the liver is exactly the same as the problem of alcohol in the liver, because it causes the exact same processes. It causes glycation, it causes oxidative stress, it causes mitochondrial dysfunction, and basically drives insulin resistance, this phenomenon that we now know is at the base of virtually all chronic metabolic diseases. Therefore, your pancreas has to make extra insulin to make the liver do its job, because now the liver's not working right because it's been poisoned. And so insulin levels rise all over the body, and now you've got the risk for Alzheimer's, you've got the risk for heart disease, you've got the risk for cancer, you've got the risk for virtually every other chronic metabolic disease on the plate. All because of what happened to your liver.
Yeah.
And fructose, that sweet molecule in sugar, basically has the same fate as alcohol. So when people say, oh, well, little sugar's fine. The answer is, yeah, because your intestine diverts that little bit away from the liver. As soon as you overwhelm that capacity, now your liver is right in the crosshairs. And that's when chronic disease is going to start.
Yeah. Rob, you're a pediatrician. I've seen videos of you talking with passion about this exact topic maybe 15 years ago, still online.
Something like that.
When was the first time for you that you started to think, what's going on here? In the book, you have been pretty, it's pretty provocative at times. I actually agree with it, so I like it. You've really gone out there, you've ripped into modern medicine at times, and we're definitely going to talk about that.
Yep.
But when was it, because you do have this sort of incredible passion and energy to get this message out there, and I'm just wondering, what was it in your clinical experience that actually really got you into thinking there must be another way here, this can't be right?
Right. Well, so I had 3 aha moments. 3. And that sort of got me to where I am today and why I'm saying what I am saying today. The first aha moment came when I worked at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, pediatric cancer hospital. And I went there in 1995, and I was presented with a cadre of about 40 children who had survived their brain tumors, because of surgery and radiation, sometimes chemotherapy, who had become massively obese. They were perfectly normal weight before the tumor, and now they were on the order of 350 to 400 pounds. Okay? Normal kids before the tumor, and now massively obese. And there's a name for this. It's called hypothalamic obesity. It was first written about, first described in 1901 by Freilich and Babinski, 2 of the greats of international neurology. And I had all these kids with hypothalamic obesity that I had to take care of. And how do you get them to lose weight? How do you get them to get better? And it had been shown previously that diet and exercise is useless. In fact, George Bray, the father of obesity research in America, in 1975, had taken 8 of these kids on his ward and fed them 500 calories a day for a month. What do you think their weight did?
Well, you would expect it came down, but I suspect in this case it probably didn't.
It went up.
Yeah.
Okay, 500 calories a day, and their weight went up. How does that happen? The answer is it happens because they were burning it slower than they were taking it in. Because their metabolism of calories had actually come to a virtual standstill. So even 500 calories a day was too much. And these kids have no energy. They sit on a couch. They're not interested in anything. The parents would actually complain that was the worst thing about this. They'd say, this is double jeopardy. My kid has, survived the tumor only to succumb to the therapy. Because my kid is a lump on a log, and he's lost interest in everything. He's lost interest in school, he's lost interest in life, he's lost interest in activity, he's lost interest in friends, he's lost interest in everything. All he wants to do is sit and sleep. And so I had to take care of these kids. So I went to the literature and I said, the other thing was that this was exactly when the hormone leptin had been discovered. Leptin was discovered in 1994. And I was prepared for that discovery because I worked at Rockefeller University with the guys who discovered it, Jeff Friedman and Rudy Leibel. Okay, we were all the MDs at Rockefeller University all, had to take call in the hospital together. So we were always trading, call dates and everything. So everybody knew what everybody else was doing. So I knew that they were trying to clone this, this hormone, out of these mice. And so when they did in 1994, I was very prepared for it. So I moved to St. Jude, and I had these kids, and it's like, what am I going to do for them? And I postulated right then that these kids must have leptin resistance. These kids can't see their leptin. And the reason is because their hypothalamus is dead, because we killed it because of the tumor or the surgery or the radiation. And so because they can't see their leptin, their brain thinks they're starving. So the question was, okay, their brain thinks they're starving. What's downstream of leptin? What's actually making them gain the weight? The starvation's why they're hungry, but what's making them gain the weight? Well, we knew that these kids made a lot of insulin. And we knew that there's this animal model of damaging the hypothalamus, and they put out enormous amounts of insulin. And you could actually stop that by cutting the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the nerve that leads from the brain to the pancreas, and then the insulin would go down. So I said, well, I can't cut their vagus nerve. I'm not a surgeon, and that's a little drastic. But what if I gave them a medicine that suppressed their insulin release? So we gave them a drug called octreotide, a drug that is used by endocrinologists to usually suppress growth hormone release, but it also suppresses insulin release. So we repurposed it, and we gave it to these kids, and lo and behold, they started losing weight. And they couldn't lose weight before. George Bray showed they gained weight, but they were losing weight. And something even more remarkable happened. They started exercising spontaneously. One kid started competitive swimming. 2 kids started lifting weights at home. 1 kid became the manager of his high school basketball team, running around collecting all the basketballs. I mean, these were kids who sat on the couch, ate Doritos, and slept. And now they're active again. And the parents would say, oh my God, I've got my kid back. And the kid would say, this is the first time my head hasn't been in the clouds since the tumor.
Yeah.
So something had changed their relationship to the world. Not just their relationship to food, but their relationship to the world. So we thought, this is very interesting. So we did a double-blind placebo-controlled trial, and this time built a quality of life measure into the protocol. And sure enough, the lower we got the insulin with the drug, not only the more weight they lost, but the more active they were. So what this did, the reason why this is so important, and the reason I'm spending so much time on it, Ranga, is because this turns the first law of thermodynamics on its head. Because the standard interpretation of the first law goes like this. The first law is, the total energy inside a closed system remains constant. Your energy can neither be created nor destroyed, just shifted around. Okay? The standard interpretation that we learn in medical school, and what the general public learns, is if you eat it, you better burn it, or you're going to store it. In which case, the storing part, the fat gain, is secondary to the primary problems, which are the eating and the burning, the gluttony and the sloth. Therefore, the weight gain is secondary to the gluttony and the sloth. Therefore, it's about behavior. Fix the behavior, fix the weight. What we showed in these kids was it's exactly the opposite. Turn it around. What we showed was if you're going to store it, that is a high insulin level leading to obligate weight gain, and you expect to burn it, that is normal energy expenditure for normal quality of life, because energy expenditure and quality of life are synonyms for each other, then you're going to have to eat it. And now the storage is primary and the behaviors are secondary. The gluttony and sloth are actually because of leptin resistance.
So we get sick first, and then the weight comes afterwards.
That's right. We get sick first, and the weight is secondary. That's exactly right. So this is, monumental. This is huge. But of course, it goes against everything that we are taught, and it goes against everything that, doctors routinely believe. But this was my first aha moment. My second aha moment came in 2006. So I realized that insulin was the bad guy, and we started then changing what we did in clinic. Instead of worrying about weight, we worried about insulin. We said, get the insulin down any way you can. And that's what my clinic became. It became an insulin reduction clinic. It wasn't a weight loss clinic. It was an insulin reduction clinic. And when we got the insulin down, then they lost weight. So in 2006, I was asked to give a talk at the NIH. Okay, specifically the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina. They were having their 100th anniversary of public health. And it was a 2-day symposium. The first day was on their successes, like lead poisoning and pollution and asthma, things they'd figured out and, been able to do something for the public health. And the second day was on challenges. And the morning was going to be obesity, metabolic syndrome, and the afternoon was going to be ADD and autism. Okay. So they asked me to give a talk. What do you think is the single most important environmental exposure that leads to obesity and metabolic syndrome? And I figured that they probably figured I was going to, give a talk about some, like BPA or some other, environmental, toxicant, that's in the water or in the air or, something like that. And I thought to myself, how am I going to, make this worthwhile? And I thought to myself, all right, wait a second. Let's go backwards here. Children today get 2 diseases they never got before. Type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease. Those 2. Children never got those before. Now, lots of kids get them. All right? So, I looked up type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease. And of course, I know a lot about both of them, but I very specifically looked for origins and causation. It turns out that in the old days, back in the 1970s, before this pandemic of chronic disease started, both those diseases were the diseases of alcohol. Type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease were the diseases of alcohol. But kids don't drink alcohol. So I said, all right, is there something they're exposed to that's like alcohol? So I opened up my Leninger, biochemistry textbook from 1974, sitting at this table that I'm at right now. And I said, what the hell is like alcohol? And there it was. It stared me right in the friggin' face, right off the page from 1974. And the answer was fructose. Fructose and alcohol are metabolized virtually identically. And it makes sense that that would be the case, because after all, where do you get alcohol from? Fermentation of fructose. It's called wine.
Yeah.
We do it in Napa and Sonoma every day. Okay, the big difference between fructose and alcohol is that for alcohol, the yeast does the first step of metabolism called glycolysis. For fructose, we do our own first step of metabolism. But after that, what the mitochondria see are exactly the same as acetyl-CoA. It's just a question of which was the substrate. Was it the ethanol or was it the fructose? But ultimately, they end up with the same fate. So it's very clear, all of a sudden, looking at that right there, that this is the substrate that is driving both the type 2 diabetes and the fatty liver disease. So I put together a talk, and I went to North Carolina, and I said, this is what I think's going on, and here's why. Half-hour talk. And then there was the bathroom break. And, I got my applause, and then everyone left the room. And they didn't come back. I'm standing there at the podium talking with, this person, that person. And I'm No one's coming back for the next session. And then I had to use the bathroom. So I went out and I actually got tackled in the friggin' bathroom of the NIH by a bunch of crazed toxicologists screaming at me saying, "Oh my God, oh my God, you're right. This makes perfect sense. This is the toxin. You have to tell everyone about this." I guess I'm still doing it.
I guess you still are.
So, if the toxicologist went berserk, might be true. And then that was the second aha. And then the third aha.
We'll be back to the conversation in just a moment. Now, many of us struggle to find time to eat all of these incredible whole foods. That's why I'm a big fan of good quality whole food supplements like this one that's been in my own life for over 3 years now. It contains over 75 whole food source ingredients, vitamins, minerals, pre and probiotics, and it can help us support our energy, focus, digestion, and our immune system. Athletic Greens are giving my audience a fantastic offer. 1 year's free supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first order. You can see all the details at athleticgreens.com/live more, or simply click on the link below. Now, back to the conversation.
It was not even my aha. It was my colleague's aha, but I adopted it. So we got very interested in sugar here at UCSF after that. We actually have a group of us who we call the Sugar Hill Gang. They're actually referenced in the book here. But my colleagues, Kristen Carnes, Laura Schmidt, and Stan Glantz, started looking at the paper trail of the food industry back in the 1960s and found the actual paper trail that showed that the food industry paid off scientists to exonerate sugar and finger saturated fat as the bad guy. We actually found their documents that showed the money transfer and the communications, just like what the January 6th committee is doing now, follow the money. And we actually proved that the sugar industry put their thumb on the scale back in the 1960s to exonerate their product, because there had been data that had been coming out at that point showing that sugar was not good for you. In fact, that's what John Yudkin found. Remember, Pure White and Deadly. And he had found, shown that data. And so people were starting to cast a fisheye at sugar. And so they had to go into overdrive mode to PR this problem away. And so they approached the chairman of the Department of Nutrition at the Harvard School of Public Health, Fred Stair, and his associate, Marg Hegstead, who ended up becoming the head of the U.S. Department of Agriculture in 1970, to pay them off $6,500 back then, which would be about $50,000 today, to write 2 review articles to appear in the New England Journal of Medicine that basically said saturated fat's the bad guy and sugar is no problem whatsoever. So that's the third aha moment. It's all a scam. The whole thing's a put-up job. And that's why I wrote Metabolical.
Sugar and alcohol. I don't think people commonly would put the two things together. People, I think, Joe Public, I think would think, okay, alcohol, I know if I drink too much, it's not good for me, it's going to cause problems with my liver. I think there's that understanding, and if I drink a little bit, have some days off a week, the odd glass of wine here and there is probably not going to be too bad for me, I think is what most people tend to think.
That's true. And if that were the case, that would be true. And that's true for about the 40% of Americans who are social drinkers. 40% are teetotalers, don't touch this stuff, okay? 40% are social drinkers, can pick up a beer, put it down like me. Okay, but 10% are binge drinkers and 10% are hardcore alcoholics.
Yeah. But I don't think people think of sugar in the same way in terms of what it does for the liver. And I think that's that's a really, I think, eye-opening comparison for a lot of people. The other thing you said, which I think really beautifully ties into the start of this conversation, is that you started running an insulin reduction clinic.
Right.
And, you know, like you, I'm very passionate in root causes and
Right.
this idea that we've labeled all these so-called separate diseases. We get taught about them at medical school as though they're all separate entities. For this disease, you take this drug and you have this sort of treatment, and we look at that downstream pathology, don't we? But you mentioned mitochondria at the start in terms of what sugar or excess sugar can do to mitochondria, and that, you know, mitochondrial dysfunction sits at the heart of so many different conditions, but also insulin resistance, right? So that insulin resistance, that insulin lowering clinic actually would probably, depending on who was coming in, and I appreciate you're a pediatrician, but if all of us as doctors ran insulin reduction clinics,
We would get rid of 75% of the chronic disease in America, in the world.
exactly. It's that root cause again, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Which is what I'm trying to, bring to, medicine. Unfortunately, medicine is provincial. Medicine doesn't, respond very well to, new ideas.
Yeah.
It's, it's a cartel, if you will.
You're very critical of modern medicine in the book. You say modern medicine treats symptoms. You say modern medicine is not
You
the
say that
solution.
too,
I do indeed, and I agree with this. It's something it's one of my big frustrations in my, 21 year career seeing patients. It's like, I sometimes wonder if doctors honestly ask themselves sometimes at the end of their day, and obviously it depends where you work. I'm not talking about intensive care. I'm talking about, chronic patients that. And I did this once, Rob. I did this in general practice once. I asked myself at the end of the day, how many patients do you honestly think you've really helped today? And, quite a few years ago, it was 20%. I thought I've only helped 20% of people. The other 80%, I've done something. I've sent them off for a test. I've, referred them, or I've given them a drug. But I kind of knew they'd be back. I thought, I'm not really getting to the heart of this problem. I knew it, and I kind of feel the patient knew it as well. And that's kind of one of the things that led me on this journey to try and understand that there must be a different way. And, that's why I think Metabolical is such a wonderful book. It outlines the history, it outlines the science, but it also gives some really practical solutions. And, I love we mentioned the liver a lot so far. So one of your big messages in the book is protect the liver and feed the gut,
Right.
in terms of dietary advice for people. And, lots been written about food in the past, but that's very fresh, I think. That's quite a new idea for people. And I wonder if you could explain then, what do you mean protect the liver and feed the gut?
Sure. Well, before we go into protect, deliver, feed the gut, because that'll take up the whole rest of our podcast, is explaining all that. I want to just address the whole medical school thing, and how you felt as a doctor. Me too. The bottom line is, we treat medicine, and unfortunately, medical schools treat medicine like a big game of Clue. Colonel Mustard in the conservatory with the candlestick. Match the symptom card with the diagnosis card, with the treatment card, and discharge your patient. In fact, in 1980, there was a game that we used to play in residency, on like Sunday mornings before things got busy in the ER, called Intern. And that was what you did. You basically took your symptom, you got a symptom card, you got a diagnosis card, and you got a treatment card. And once you got the three of them together, you got rid of the patient. First, player to discharge, to discharge all their patients won the game, and that's how we treated it. So, these diseases, got a meningitis, here's an antibiotic. Got cancer, here's a chemotherapy. But the fact is, chronic disease doesn't, really fit into that.
Yeah.
There are 8, count them, 8 chronic diseases that have completely taken over modern medicine. 8. And here they are: type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian disease, those 8. Those 8 now account together for 75% of all healthcare costs. And none of them have a cure. None of them even have a treatment. But they all have a prevention. We're not preventing it. We're handing out, statins or, oral hypoglycemics or, antihypertensives, like candy. But that's treating the symptoms, the manifestations of the disease, not actually treating the cause. And the reason is because those diseases are not really the diseases. What's going on underneath to cause all 8 of those diseases are exactly the same. They're just in different organs. And here are the 8 things that I outline in the book, what I call the diseases that are not diseases. I call them the hateful 8. And here they are. Okay, and these are things that people don't know because they don't have ICD-11 codes. And doctors don't know what to do about them, so they don't even mention them. So no one's ever heard of them. And they didn't learn them in medical school either. So here they are, 8. Number 1, glycation. Number 2, oxidative stress. Number 3, mitochondrial dysfunction. Number 4, insulin resistance. Number 5, membrane instability. Number 6, inflammation. Number 7, methylation. Number 8, autophagy. Now, these are all normal phenomena that happen, but they can be speeded up or slowed down by what you eat. Now, it turns out when you have control over all 8 of those things, you will be 110 playing tennis. When you don't have control over those 8 things, you will be 40 years old in a wheelchair with 2 stumps on dialysis waiting for your next stroke. And of course, everything in between. So